creative recovery is not about making art. It is about reclaiming your freedom by shifting your perspective and liberating yourself from limiting beliefs that tell you the life that you desire is not accessible to you. Hello, and welcome to The Art of Lost and Found, a podcast all about the process of creative recovery. From those low lows to the high highs, this podcast explores what it means to be a truly creative person and how creativity is a superpower that we all have that we can use for our own well-being and transformation. I'm your host, Brooke Eston. So I've been doing this podcast for a few months now, and having done several dozen interviews at this point, a very, very clear pattern has started to emerge. And it feels similar to a type of hero's journey or heroine's journey, which has very clear and consistent stages and steps along the way. Although the details of how that is enacted in the story is completely different. I'm discovering an artistic journey that maps out various stages that so far appear to be universal. So I wanted to share what I've been able to map out with the hope that you'll also be able to see your own story within the context of this frame. And then I would love to share a little bit about my story of art of lost and found and how I navigated my way through a series of reframes and reinventions that came after critical crash and burn moments in my life. So first, let's plot out the cycle, the creative journey. Let's just call it the creative journey. It starts off in that we are all born into this world as pure creative beings. We have nothing that is clogging up our channels just yet, and we use our imagination and our innate creativity to communicate with other people and to make sense of the world around us. So we'll often explore our environment through our various senses, and then we try to make things happen. And if you watch any toddler anywhere in the world, across pretty much any culture, you can see this on full display. They are being creative in the way that they're communicating. They are incredibly creative in the way that they're exploring their environment. And you see them try to piece things together in the toddler phase, oftentimes unsuccessfully, but the creative urge is incredibly present. Then fast forward a few years. And what I've observed is that usually between the ages of, let's just say 4 and 8 years old, something starts to enter that clear creative channel and disrupt it, create fog, create uncertainty, create doubt, create shame. And the form that tends to take is one or both of two different ideas that get introduced to the child. The first is you're not good at being creative. That usually comes after you have, for example, drawn a picture of somebody and enthusiastically given it to them, and they don't recognize it as themselves. They tell you, this doesn't look like me, or you're not very good at this, or the worst, which is, oh, you're just not talented. You're just not gifted. This is probably not your thing. So that's the first. The second is the thing that you have done has no value. So this can come in the form of, stop talking to your imaginary friends. That is weird and it makes me uncomfortable. And should we be concerned about you? Or in the context of school, if you take an assignment and you get really creative with it and you think outside the box, you create something that you think is even more spectacular than whatever the assignment is. And the teacher says, no, 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 there's no value in what you've done. You didn't complete the assignment the way you were supposed to, so you don't get credit for this. So those two ideas, one or both of those two ideas, get implanted in our beings. And then over the years, we feed those narratives that oftentimes end up morphing into a more simplified, underlying, limiting belief that manifests in all areas of our life. And that is, I'm unworthy. I'm unworthy of pursuing my artistic urges. I'm not a creative person, or I could never do that. That is reserved for other people. Whatever it is, you or we all have created a barrier and a false separation between our creative capacity, our creative identity, and the way that we are identified and showing up in the world. And if you deny something that is a fundamental part of who you are for long enough, it fractures you. When you are carrying that belief that you're not worthy, that you're not good enough, that you're some type of an imposter, it keeps you small. But we're not here to be small. And we are not small beings. So when you try to stuff that into such a small box or such a small cage, it starts to seep out in all different areas of your life anyway. And if you're able to get out ahead of it and are self-reflective enough, emotionally intelligent enough, identify with being resilient enough, and you are able to make that transition from being in the grind and the daily hustle and struggle into a lifestyle that is more aligned, then it's not particularly dramatic. But most of us do it the highly dramatic way, which is we blow our lives up. Either we do that ourselves, like me, that was my primary strategy, or we wait for it to happen to us. And the way that that usually manifests, the thing that happens that fully cracks us open, that fully shatters us, usually comes in the form of some type of loss. The loss comes and it completely ruptures us. We are broken into 1,000 different pieces. And from there, we have two options. One is to feel sorry for ourselves and to stay broken. That starts to manifest as anxiety, depression, isolation, addiction, and a whole variety of self-destructive behaviors. Or the other option is we put ourselves back together. A key piece is in the process of being disrupted, those pieces shape-shifted. So when you put yourself back together, it's no longer possible to put yourself back together in the same configuration as it was before. And if you try, it feels uncomfortable, it feels out of alignment, and inevitably you're going to repeat the cycle of fragmentation and breaking open again. If you embrace the disruption in your life and you embrace the opportunity to reinvent yourself and redefine yourself and reconfigure yourself, then you start stepping into a life that feels more resonant, more activated, more aligned, more vibrant, and you create a whole new lifestyle for yourself that honors and respects your creative identity. So as we reconfigure ourselves and redesign our lives to support that innate creative power that comes out in the form of self-expression, that comes out in the form of embodiment and presence and feeling connected to something larger than ourselves, then our journey becomes one of maintenance. And this podcast is called The Art of Lost and Found. It is not called The Art of Arrival because I believe we never arrive. I think that creativity is very similar to health. You don't get to a point where you're healthy and then you're done. That's not a thing. It's an ongoing process that you make decisions every single day across all different areas of your life that either support your health or chip away at your health. And I believe the same goes for creativity. You make decisions every day around doing things that are going to support your creative self or that are going to harm and take away and chip away at your creative self. If we don't maintain it, then we repeat the cycle again. If we do maintain it, then we live a life where we have more inspiration, more creativity, more possibility, more opportunity, and a greater sense of purpose and vitality. It feeds this energy that we have in us that for many years in a capitalistic, patriarchal, industrial framework, the creative embracing is not super supported or beneficial because the power structures find that to be quite threatening. I want to move into my creative journey and how that maps against all of the steps that I just revealed in introducing this common arc, this common journey. So, for me, my childhood was incredibly creative, and I received a ton of support from my family. When I was about 5 years old, I had a really difficult experience. There was a massive fire that swept through our county, and we were on evacuation alert for a few days before actually needing to be evacuated. And although I am told that the fires did not actually come close enough to threaten our house, in my 5-year-old brain, I understood this as us literally outrunning the flames. So, of course, I was terrified, I was traumatized, and I started having nightmares. I started having nightmares that essentially we were inside the house and couldn't get out in time, and we all ended up dead. My mother had learned some art therapy techniques from her training as an educator. Uh, and she had me draw a picture of my family safe and sound outside of the house with blue skies and rainbows. And it helped me to shift my highly active imagination away from all of these thoughts of doom and gloom and destruction into a new place that was optimistic and positive and energizing and comforting. And in that moment, the seed was absolutely planted around the incredible power that our imaginations have. So, fast forward a few years, and at the ripe old age of 9 years old, my parents, who had a dream of their own, announced to my brother and I, who my brother was 7, I was 9, that we would be moving to Bangkok, Thailand for the next 2 years because they had taken a job at an international school and it was an exciting and financially rewarding opportunity that would allow them to have a novel experience and an adventure while also earning enough money to build the house of their dreams that they were never going to be able to do if they stayed in California. So we go. And when we arrived in Thailand after what felt like a week on an airplane, I had a really tough time adjusting. Everything about that experience was shocking and jarring to my system. I mean, even the air felt different because of the humidity. The water tasted different. I don't even know if I had seen an Asian person before stepping foot into Asia. And I felt like a fish out of water. I stuck out like a sore thumb. It was very clear to me that I was different. I was othered. And everywhere I went, people would stare at me. They would make comments about the way I looked. And it was very common for people to come up and touch me, touch my hair, touch my face, and make comments about the way I looked in a way that made me feel very different and very othered. I felt in a way that I had been betrayed by my parents, that they hadn't been able to protect me from the pain and suffering that I experienced in that transition. And that ignited a really intense and difficult period of extreme rebellion. By the time I was 12 years old, I was smoking cigarettes. I got my first tattoo, and I was starting to experiment with alcohol and drugs and going out and exploring all Bangkok nightlife had to offer. So by the time I was 14 or 15, I had also become involved with romantic partners and was exploring my sexuality and my sexual identity. And I was searching for something that made me feel powerful and free and expressed. So when I was 14 and had an opportunity to go to Europe and go to Spain for the first time, something very unexpected happened, which planted a seed that would drive me to where I am today. When I got to Europe and I stepped off the plane, I was in an unfamiliar but beautiful, magical environment full of art and incredible architecture and people making out on the streets and playing Spanish guitar and dancing flamenco in the plazas, and just so vibrant. Yet I looked just like everybody else. I blended in to this place that felt exotic and attractive and inspiring to me. And I felt this sense of inspired power and deep alignment. And right then and there, I made a commitment to myself that I was going to live in Spain. That was my heart place. And even though it doesn't really make a ton of sense for me to do that, it was as if something deep inside me had been awakened and I became aware of a fundamental part of my journey. So it took a long time between age 14 when I made that decision and age 30 when I actually moved to Spain. And throughout that time, I went through my own creative journey that maps exactly onto the structure that I shared at the beginning of this podcast. I had to reinvent myself after huge and dramatic experiences of loss of people I loved, loss of jobs that I heavily relied on, and loss of a clear sense of where home was and what I was meant to be doing in this world. And without going into all of the details of that experience, I will just at a very high level share that this disconnection of my core fundamental identity as a creative person was not super clear to me because I position myself as what Julia Cameron would call a shadow artist, which can be explained as somebody who doesn't pursue their own creative passions, but instead helps other people pursue theirs. So I did that. I did that in a variety of different ways. But at the end of the day, that's not where fulfillment comes from. Fulfillment comes from being in alignment with what is fundamentally true for you internally, and having that be in connection and in alignment and in service of what is needed externally. And the process of lost and found, this concept of wayfinding or pathfinding, the building the bridge as you are walking it, is an essential part of how we rediscover and reintegrate our creative essence. And in my case, I lost really important relationships because I was out of alignment. I wasn't communicating my truth, and I wasn't able to be present through the discomfort. I also lost jobs, and had a really significant, powerful, and honestly quite traumatic Me Too experience as I reached the peak of my career working with tech startups in Silicon Valley. And a relationship that I thought was safe and sacred turned out to be a very unfortunate power dynamic that ultimately blew my life up. And after a lot of suffering and a lot of a lot of therapy, a lot of healing work, a lot of re-education, I got to a place where I was able to shift the narrative and the story that I had placed on that experience. And that's how I reclaimed my freedom and how I created a new story and a new life for myself that continues to flourish over here in the south of Spain, in the place that I had always wanted to be and had been trying to get to for, almost 20 years. And the thing that I have learned that has served me the most on my own creative journey and my own process of creative recovery is that creative recovery is not about making art. It is about reclaiming your freedom by shifting your perspective and liberating yourself from limiting beliefs that tell you the life that you desire is not accessible to you. And that's what I'm dedicating my life's work to now, is helping people to reclaim their sense of freedom and possibility through the process of using personal growth, personal development, emotional intelligence to uncover what those limiting beliefs are, what those stories that we've been telling ourselves truly are, and where did they come from? And then how do we relearn? How do we lay new patterns? How do we embrace the parts of ourselves that we have kept buried and hidden for so long in a way that supports us in activating that creative energy so that we can create greatness in our lives and connect that to the larger world? So for me personally, I have two businesses. At this point, I have a coaching business where I help people through the process of creative recovery using a combination of coaching techniques, therapeutic arts, and emotional intelligence trainings. So this helps my clients get to a place where they can start to overcome these limiting beliefs that keep them small so that they're able to connect with their creative visions. That's the coaching side. The other side of the work that I do is I have a creative agency that meets people who are ready to bring their creative gifts into the world, but don't know how to bridge the gap between their clear creative visions and actually having it be real out there in the world. So I have these two areas of my world, my professional world, that are committed to creative expression and creative inspiration and encouragement, while simultaneously creating a safe space for self-expression and for personal growth and development and reflection, while also leaving room for the more business and commercial assets of becoming a quote unquote professional creative. And although we understand the difference between, let's say, a professional athlete and someone who's athletic, we haven't fully embraced that concept in the realm of creativity, right? A lot of people who have creative practices don't call themselves creatives or artists, or really haven't allowed themselves to embrace their creative identity, oftentimes because they feel that they can't do that until they reach a professional level. But in the same way that somebody who is athletic does not need to be a professional paid athlete, I want us to wake up and remember and embrace the concept that you do not have to be a professional creative, somebody who is paid by other people to be creative, in order to fully step into and claim your creative identity. You can embrace creativity without being a professional creative. That being said, oftentimes that is part of the journey. So I am so in my element and in my state of flow when I'm able to help people move through that transformation from being small and insecure and feeling unworthy into fully stepping into their creative essence and their creative power, and doing it in a way that is balanced, that is healthy, and that is in alignment with the larger values in their life. Then it's a matter of maintaining it. How do you not get sucked into the grind? How do you remain in a place where you can have perspective? And that's the next level of the work that I'm starting to move into as well. So if this arc, this creative story, this creative journey resonates with you, or if you found anything in my personal story that feels inspiring or empowering or activating, then I invite you to subscribe to this podcast, to find me on Instagram. My handle is at The Creative Amplifier, and to check out all of the free resources and offerings that I have on my website, brookeston.com. It's also thecreativeamplifier.com. They go to the same place, because I fundamentally believe that what the world needs is more people who have come alive and are feeling in alignment with their deep core sense of who they are in a way that is expressed and embodied in the larger context of the world. I feel like the more aligned we are, the happier and healthier and more generous we are. And that is what's needed in order to help us overcome all of the challenges that we're facing now. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode of the Art of Lost and Found podcast. I hope that you are feeling inspired and empowered to go forth and explore your curiosity and creativity. As always, if you want any more information about any of our guests or the show notes or anything we discussed on today's episode, you can head over to www.brookeston.com/podcast. Thank you so much, and looking forward to seeing you in the next episode.